Welcome to Plant Your Seed. I'm your host, Fred Ferris. On each episode, we share stories of how ordinary people have transformed their lives. Each story is compassionate, each story is authentic, and each story is a transformation. Here are the stories of the people who are changing our world by transitioning to a plant-based diet. Today on Plant Your Seed, joining us from the Pacific Northwest in the state of Washington, we have Wendy Smith. Wendy is the co-founder and director of Odd Man Inn Animal Refuge. She is a military veteran, registered nurse, and vegan animal rights advocate. Welcome, Wendy.
Hi, Fred. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. I just want to start with, I just want to read one thing to start, okay?
Okay.
I want to start by reading this. Co-founder and director of Odd Man Inn, vice president, marketing director, communications director, volunteer coordinator for a crew of 60, responsible for the daily maintenance and medical care of 140 animals, social media manager of Odd Man Inn, lead copywriter for all brand content, fundraising chairperson, primo poop scooper, veggie chopper, and hoof boss, not to mention your other job, emergency room registered nurse in a pandemic. Wow. How do you even find the time? I look at this and I look at my life and I'm like, damn, I'm not doing something.
I'll tell you, I also make a mean pot of red beans and rice.
Oh, I bet you do.
I don't know. I think, where do you find the time? I think it's all in what you're used to. You definitely don't delve into something like that overnight. It just kind of grows on you over time. It's like a mom who's a mother of 10 children, and people are like, how do you do that? How do you manage that? You don't have all 10 children at one time. You get used to one more responsibility, one more mouth to feed, one more responsibility. And there are some things that come really easily to me just because I've done them for so long. And so, maybe it sounds difficult, but, when you're an old hand at it, you just kind of do it by instinct. So yes, it's a lot of different hats to wear. And I'll tell you, it's one of the most difficult parts of running an animal sanctuary and being the founder of an animal sanctuary is wearing all of the different hats at different times during every day.
Yeah, it's not like you get a day off. Like most people, they go to work like, okay, so you're an emergency room registered nurse in a pandemic and you work there and then you go home and you got to go to work. It's not like I'm just going to sit on the couch for like a day and just chill out. You don't have that.
Well, yeah, we don't even have a couch. So I wouldn't be able to do that. I wouldn't be able to do that. But no, you're right. So just to clarify, I work in an urgent care facility. So I am a trained emergency room nurse, but I have transitioned into urgent care, which honestly, during a pandemic, urgent care is functioning as an emergency room. It's just an emergency room with very limited resources. We only have so many things to be able to take care of people during a pandemic. But when I get off of my shift as a nurse, I immediately go straight home and get back to my other job, which is helping run Odd Man Inn. So you're correct. There is no sitting down and relaxing. I find relaxation in seeing that the work gets done at the end of the day, that the animals are comfortable and fed and cozy, and they have dry beds and full bellies. And I love a clean barn. Nothing gives me more relaxation than a clean barn. So we're all a little different, right? Like, I don't find relaxation in just sitting still. I find relaxation in getting tasks done.
We'll get back to Odd Man in a second, but I would like to know how and when you transitioned to a plant-based vegan diet.
Oh gosh, that's such a good question. So let me just tell you, I grew up in inner city New Orleans, and my mom was a single mom, and I really didn't even understand what being vegan was for all of my childhood. And a good deal of my adult life. So I didn't grow up with that as part of our culture or even part of our like nomenclature. Like I didn't even really understand what the word was. But as a kid, I was the kind of kid that like, I mean, I loved animals. My poor mom, I begged her for animals as pets all the time. And I was the kind of kid that like would organize all of my stuffed animals on the bed so that everybody got a chance to be in the front of the pile, even like the kind of like dirty, unkempt ones that were like missing eyeballs and like had ears that were tattered. You know, I've always been an advocate for the underdog. So I'd be like, well, I want to make sure that the ugly one gets a chance to be in the front too. So when I made my bed in the morning, I'd arrange all of the animals and make sure they were all neat and comfortable and organized, and the disheveled ones were in the front. And I look back at that now and realize I was an animal advocate before I even understood what animal advocate meant. And so then in my adult life, I don't have stuffed animals anymore. So I didn't really know how to transition that mindset as an adult. I didn't know what being an animal advocate looked like as an adult. And then I met my husband, Josh, who is my partner and also the co-founder of Odd Man Inn. And Josh and I met in 2010. So I was well into my 30s by the time we met, and he had already been a vegan for close to 15 years. And I remember when we were dating and he told me that he was vegan, I thought he was joking, which I look back and I'm so ashamed of myself that I just didn't understand what he meant exactly. Like, are you trying to impress me with this? Because I don't really understand what that means. And he literally had to teach me from the ground up what it meant to be vegan. And at first I was a little resistant, like, wait a minute, hang on just a minute. What is this? Where is this going? And then he said to me, just so you understand, we can date and have fun, but I will never be serious with someone who's not vegan.
Wow.
And that was pretty eye-opening to me. Like, he meant it. And here I am like, wait a minute, I thought there was a catch here. Like, I kind of look cute and I'm like height, weight, proportionate. And what do you mean? Like, I don't have any baggage, but he was dead serious. And what that did was it really made me think, there's something to this vegan thing that I'm missing. I'm not understanding this. And I have the type of brain that is, I really love to learn. I love a good project and I love to learn. And so Josh and I fell in love over him teaching me what it meant to be vegan.
Wow.
And we married a couple of years later, and I became vegan before he married me. And now I look back and think, I just didn't understand what it meant to be vegan or what it looked like to be an adult animal rights activist when you don't have stuffed animals anymore. How do I continue that mindset and that advocacy in a way that is actually meaningful? And the answer is, you stop hurting animals.
Right. When Josh told you that he was vegan, and you were like, I don't understand what that means. But when he told you that he could never be serious about somebody that wasn't vegan, how did that make you feel at that moment?
It made me feel like I was clearly misunderstanding something important in life. Like I have missed the boat is how I felt. Like does everybody else realize this? And I am the only one who doesn't understand this. I felt really like I should understand this and I don't. And so that really drove me to ask him questions. And he was the most patient and wonderful teacher. Not only was he like, we were romantically involved and we were dating, but we were living long distance. He was living in Denver. I was living in Portland. And we had long conversations overnight, the way that people do when you're dating long distance. And our conversations would really revolve around, the reality of factory farming, or, which probably doesn't sound all that sexy on the phone late at night, but he was really great about giving me just enough information that then when I would say, whoa, wait a minute, what are you saying? Like, I was the person that didn't even understand that cows had to be impregnated in order to produce milk, and their babies had to be taken away from them. He had to teach me from the ground up, and he would give me just enough information, and then I would say, stand by, I got to research this myself. Like, stop, that's too much. It's too much. And the next day, I would watch YouTube videos. I'd look at websites that he recommended. I did my own research. And then I would come back the next night and we would talk on the phone. And I'd be like, okay, I have questions. And so I really felt like, I can't believe that I have not done this research on my own, that it is this well hidden of a secret, that I feel like I am an educated human and I had no idea that it was this bad.
Yeah, I find that that's one of the big misconceptions, I think, is the milk and the cows.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
how they go about getting the milk from the cows, and how invasive it is, and how it's a terrible thing. And people don't think that. I mean, I never thought that. You never thought that.
Mm-hmm.
You just think, oh, well, cows just give milk, right?
It's so interesting that even people who are vegetarians for animal rights reasons still struggle. The most common thing that people struggle with as they transition to a plant-based diet is cheese. That's the one that people always say, right? But
right.
Cheese, except the dairy industry is it's so abusive, and like there's so many horrors associated with it. And yes, it's great to be a vegetarian. It's a start, but that dairy industry piece is so horrible and so addictive and so difficult for people to give up. And it's a really well hidden secret. Like, the marketing for eons is so savvy and deceptive.
If you're a vegetarian, you're still supporting the dairy industry.
Yeah.
I think that everybody runs through that disconnect of going to the store and thinking, oh, this is just a piece of chicken in a cellophane wrapper. Cellophane, what they call it these days? Am I dating myself?
I think so.
So, sorry.
I say cellophane
in
too.
Plastic.
It's okay.
So in plastic. And I think that there's a disconnect between people and their food. They don't actually think of it as an animal. They just think of it as something at the supermarket. Now, is that some experience that you have as well?
Yeah, I think that it's interesting that as soon as I started trying to actively engage my brain about what exactly I was eating, that, like, we're taught from a really young age to disconnect from our food and to disconnect from what we're actually eating. But as soon as I actively engaged that in my brain, my transition became so much easier. And I can really clearly remember as a kid, I was maybe 6 or 7. I was pretty young. I can remember my mom baking chicken, and we were poor, and my mom was just barely getting by. So she didn't buy fancy like chicken cutlets. She would buy the whole chicken that came in a bag. Like, that's the cheapest way to buy chicken, where no real prep work has been done. And I can remember her cooking the chicken and taking the chicken out of the oven and thinking to myself, that kind of looks like a chicken. And I realized, like, that's because it is a chicken, right? But as a young person, I was already disconnected from what my food was, because that is how we're trained. We're like indoctrinated into that. And I don't think that my mom did it with any sort of malicious intent. That's how she was indoctrinated. So as a person in my 30s who then was trying actively to transition to a plant-based diet, all I had to do was go back to my 6-year-old brain and think, this is an actual chicken. This is not a chicken cutlet. This is not a chicken finger. This is an actual chicken. And it immediately became so much easier for me to say, no, thank you. I don't need to eat that. I don't want to actually hurt an animal, and so I don't need to eat that.
I couldn't agree more. I think that once you open your eyes, there is no going back.
Yeah. I'm always a little bit like, I always, you meet people sometimes who go down the plant-based route, and they're activists, and they're excited about being plant-based, and they're sharing recipes, and they're talking about being vegan and loving animals. And every once in a while, you come across someone who sort of backslides back into eating animals and moves away from a plant-based diet. And I've never had the opportunity to have a discussion with someone about what happened. They usually disconnect themselves completely from the plant-based world and from friends who are plant-based.
Right.
But I would love to have that conversation one day with someone, not in an antagonistic way, but just for the sake of education, to say, what happened? How could you possibly have gone back to this? You know what choices you're making, and you understand, and you've been exposed to animals who you are choosing to now harm. And how do you justify that in your brain? It's really difficult. I've never, like I said, I've never had the opportunity to have that discussion, but man, I sure would love to. And I don't know that, I'm not sure that I'd be strong enough to keep it from turning into something antagonistic, because I feel so passionately about a plant-based diet. But it sure would be interesting to know what that mindset is that makes someone change their mind and go back to hurting animals.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that would be an interesting discussion to have with somebody. And as you said, it would be difficult for me not to make it more antagonistic. It doesn't make sense to me anymore. I mean, it did,
Right.
sure, when I was growing up and I didn't know any better and everything like that. But once you kind of, I don't know, whatever it is, take the red pill or the blue pill, and you wake up and all of a
Yeah.
sudden it's like this huge rabbit hole that it's like you're looking at
Yeah.
everything. Is that something that you've run into as well?
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's a real misconception that in the healthcare field, that healthcare workers take good care of themselves, or that we, make good decisions in terms of our own health and our own health care and what we put into our bodies. So I've worked I've worked as a registered nurse for 22 years now, so more than half of my life. And I am continually exposed to an environment that is not super plant-based friendly. And it's I'm not necessarily vegan for health reasons. That's not what my inner motivation is. But to be in a workplace that is supposed to be focused on health, that we are supposed to be like setting the example and advocating and educating, it is really, really difficult to be surrounded by folks who are not plant-based. And it's not even on their radar. It's not even in the least. And so those are situations that are pretty difficult for me. Like my coworkers, I really like them. They're good folks, and they're competent folks, and they know that I run an animal sanctuary with Josh, and they know that I'm vegan, but they're only interested to a certain degree, right? Like a lot of them are only interested in terms of like, oh, your animals are so cute. We have this new little pig tater tot, and now, man, the world is crazy about tater tot. And so
I love Tater.
everybody,
I love him.
how can you not, right? Like, he's just adorable. And so it's a little bit of a gateway drug. We want people to connect with the animals, but we also want to be able to share our message with people and make sure that, like, they have that ability to connect with the animals so that we can get the message in. And it's really difficult sometimes, just to answer your question, it's really difficult sometimes to be a professional in my workplace where the values of having a plant-based diet are not a normal part of our culture. You have patients routinely that have all sorts of health problems that are directly linked to diet. And that discussion very rarely comes up with patients. And if it does, it's usually very poorly received. So when you say, like, do I ever have situations where I'm like, I could just explode? I think that's probably the closest one that I have. Like, I don't, as a nurse working for the company that I work for, I'm a representative of the company. I can only really, educate to a certain degree about diet and exercise and so forth, and eliminating animal products from your diet. But I'm not a physician, right? And I educate as best I can, and I set an example as best I can. But it becomes really difficult in situations where, like, staff members want to have, potluck for the holidays. I mean, we don't do that anymore because of the pandemic, because that's not cool. But it becomes really, really difficult when the culture that I work in should be focused on health, except there's this giant elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. And the elephant is actually the fact that all of the food that we are eating is destroying our body and destroying the environment.
Why do you think that is, specifically with healthcare workers who are educated, who I would think might know better? Why do you think that they don't embrace a vegan plant-based diet?
Gosh, I know that there are a lot of healthcare workers who do, so I don't mean to make it sound like they don't at all. But I think that whether you're a healthcare worker or whether you're an investment banker or you're a housekeeper or a gardener, we're all subjected to the same marketing and the same like I was talking about, like, indoctrination as a young person, that, some animals are food animals, other animals are not. Or we're under the misconception that, like, well, if I eat farm raised, grass fed, blah, 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 whatever all of those marketing schemes are, then it's actually better for me and it's better for the environment. Or, well, I'm going to justify it by, I'm only going to buy from local farmers. I'm only going to consume humanely slaughtered meat, right?
Like that's possible.
Well, let's just listen to how ignorant that sounds. It doesn't make sense. Humanely killed. It just doesn't make sense. So I think that healthcare worker or not, we're all subjected to the same marketing schemes. And I also think the other part of that is that people often feel like, can I really do any good with just my choices? Is it really going to fix any of these problems, whether or not I choose to eat a hamburger? So I think the problem feels overwhelming. It feels overwhelming as a vegan some days, where I'm like, oh my gosh, like, if I get one more email about, another animal that needs to be taken in and needs rescue and needs help, or another animal that's sick, sometimes it's very overwhelming. The problem is so overwhelming. But I think that oftentimes people also feel overwhelmed with how big the problem is, how much we're surrounded by animal products in our everyday life, and they feel like my choices can't possibly make a difference. And I choose to go against that. My choices absolutely make a difference. I vote with my dollar, and I choose what to eat based on what my conscience tells me, not based on what my taste buds tell me.
My feeling is that, I mean, when somebody says to me, you know, what does it matter? I'm just one person. I guess my first question is always, well, do you vote?
Right? It's good.
Now, can you tell us some of the positive changes that you've noticed since you become vegan?
Sure, sure. I feel like I feel like I mean, I've always been a really active physical person, so I didn't like notice a difference in like my weight, like because I'm just kind of this a normal steady weight. So it wasn't that. It was more like I just felt like meals and meal time and fueling my body to do the things that I needed to do suddenly became so much more kind of task oriented rather than satisfaction oriented. And I know for some people that doesn't sound like a positive thing, right? There are a lot of people out there who are foodies, like they're super hardcore about, you know, enjoying their meals and sitting to a big fancy 5-course meal. And don't get me wrong, that's nice. I'm not against that. But as someone who is more driven by I find satisfaction, and I am driven by living a life of purpose and sacrifice and work. I enjoy it. And it suddenly became so much easier to simply choose food that would fuel my body appropriately. And it removed sort of the emotion from eating. I didn't feel like, oh, well, I need to put all of this time and effort and extra work into prepping meals and making meals that were fancy. Food became fuel for me. And I found real, like, I think the word is release. Like I found real release in that like food now is actually serving a function in my life versus having all of these emotional components attached to it. Emotional, not only the enjoyment piece, but also emotional in terms of like guilt and feeling of like conflict of should I choose this or this? And is this meat that is, like we said, like humanely slaughtered? Where am I buying these things from? And what kind of practices am I supporting? And is this milk organic? And like all of that stuff was sort of eliminated. Like we eat really simple at our house. We are kind of a beans and rice family, or, you know, pasta and sauce, or, you know, occasionally I get super fancy and I make a veggie burger. but, but for us in our lifestyle and with the volume of work that we take on a daily basis, that just made mealtime so easy for me and just removed the whole emotional component from it, which for someone who maybe struggles with, you know, with weight issues or health issues, I think removing that emotional piece from eating is super healthy and super helpful.
Yeah, no, I think that for me, it's the same type of thing where I felt that I control food as opposed to food controlling me. Is
Yeah,
that
that's good.
something that
Yeah.
you would say?
Yeah, I like that. That's a really good way to phrase it. Yeah, you just said what I was trying to say. You said it in like 10 words and it took me 300. I'm so sorry. So yes, you're right. Yeah, I feel like food does not control me. I mean, my routine at the grocery store, I mean, I know exactly what I like. I know exactly what fuels me appropriately. I know what, now that I've been doing this for quite a few years, I know what's vegan. So I'm not going through the store like searching for all sorts of like crazy new ingredients. Mostly because
Hmm.
I'm just not a foodie. So I'm not the kind of person who is constantly trying a new recipe or, you know, I mean, don't get me wrong. I would love to have that kind of time, but I don't. And so food does not control me. If you look at our pantry, or our refrigerator any day of the week, you're going to see the same like 10 to 15 staple items. And it does mean that like food does not control us.
Right. I think that some people go through the idea or the thought that see food, eat food. I know friends of mine do that all the
Yeah.
time. And I ask them, well, what's in that? And they're like, I don't know.
Uh,
And I'm always just like, really? You don't know. That could be anything. And I don't know. It could be Soylent Green for all I know.
yeah.
You touched on something that I think is important, and that's that you're aligned with your values.
Yeah.
How did you kind of come to your values, and how do you learn from them, and how do you continue to use them?
Yeah. I wish that I had a really fancy, complicated answer for that, but it's so simple for me. It's, is this hurting anyone? If we're talking about food specifically, then what I think is, has this hurt anyone in order for it to be on my plate, right? So I mean, people say sometimes like, oh, I don't eat anything that has a face or nothing that has a mother. Like it's that concept, right? I just feel like I don't want to consume anything or really participate in anything that hurts someone. And I don't just mean someone as in a human animal. I mean hurt any animals. I just would rather leave it off my plate, across the board. And so, vegans, we often get questions like, well, what about honey? And what about this? And, what about, I don't know, there is a whole list of things that people, eggs, that's another good example.
If you're stranded on a desert island and
Right, exactly. Like they want to give this like long laundry list of like, well, what if this? And I feel like it's number one, it's more compelling. And number two, it's easier if I just say none across the board, nothing. I don't want to eat anything that comes from an animal, that's produced by an animal, that hurts an animal, period. And so when people have that list that they want to give me, I'm like, nope, none, nope, none of it. And it shuts down the conversation pretty quickly.
I bet it does. I always tell my kids, I'm like, okay, so we have a line, and that line is a very easy line. It's a straight line. I say everybody else's line is up and down. It's like a wave. And you look at it and you're like, okay, so dogs you can't eat, but you can eat pigs. You can't eat horses, but you can eat cows. I mean, like when you start to think about that on a basic level, you're like, why?
Yeah. And does that make sense? Right. If we really like break down those examples that you gave, does that make sense? Does it make sense that we would be up in arms about what is the dog meat festival? What do they call that? You know what I'm talking about? Like we get up in arms
China.
about this in China, right? We get up in arms about the dog meat festival because we shouldn't be eating dogs, except we're eating cows and pigs and chickens and snails and fish. And like, does this make sense, right? It's not necessarily, I think we get into trouble sometimes when we start like questioning people's morality. It's not about that. It's about just, does this make sense? If we don't need to inflict harm on other living beings, why would we? And why would we create this really complicated set of rules for some animals versus others based on nothing else other than that's just the way it's always been? It just doesn't make sense. And at the end of the day, Josh and I really feel like, and is it fair? We talk about that a lot. Is it fair that some animals are considered food animals and other animals are not? And who are we as a really imperfect species ourselves to make those decisions? We're just not equipped to say whether or not an animal deserves to be killed and consumed and another animal does not.
I agree. I could not agree more. When I was a kid, I thought I was an environmentalist, right? I was like, yeah, I'm all for, because I live by the ocean, and I was like, yeah, I'm all for the dolphins. It was dolphin safe tuna. That's what it was. And I look back on that now, and I'm like, boy, was I an idiot. How can you do that? Oh, it's safe for us to eat tuna as long as the dolphins don't get harmed. It's like I was like, oh man. I just look
We've all
back on
been
that and
there,
I just
Fred.
shake my head,
Yeah,
right?
I know. I know I've said things like that myself, Fred. You're not alone.
Right. So I mean, there is hope for people. I don't want to.
Totally.
I don't want people to feel that I'm any kind of a preachy type of vegan
No.
plant based person. All I'm
No.
saying is that I just don't understand
Yeah.
why some people think that it's okay to eat certain animals and not okay to eat other animals. And I would love to
Yeah.
hear from people to
Yeah.
understand their reasoning because I don't understand it.
Yeah. I mean, we try hard at Odd Man In to make sure that we are not only in our social media platforms where we're communicating with the general public, but also even within our own animal care crew. We try to make it so that no matter where you are on the spectrum of being on a plant-based diet versus being a full-on carnivore, that number one, our message is about compassion for all living things, and that one is really hard to argue with, right? Like
Right.
nobody wants to see animals harmed, whether you eat animals or not. Nobody wants to see them harmed. But we try to make our vibe open and welcoming for discussion about these things, and that we are not a finger pointy, preachy organization. We even have people on our animal care crew that are not plant based, and I think sometimes our plant based crew members are shocked when they realize that. But I'm very clear that there's no better way for us to have an opportunity to help people connect and ask questions and make different decisions than to invite them right into our front gate. So I mean, and we have had quite a few crew members who come to us curious about a plant-based diet. They ask questions tentatively. Once they realize it's a safe place to have those discussions, we can have some really open and honest discussions, and people change their lives because of it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I
Thanks.
agree that that's a great way to go about it is to bring people in and be inclusive and
Yep.
then when they're caring for animals they're like, well, I'm going to go home and have some bacon. This doesn't make any sense. Is it?
Doesn't make exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. So,
It doesn't make sense. Yep.
all right, let's get into Odd Man In. I love this concept. I
Okay.
just love this place.
Thank you.
Where did you get the courage to start this? I mean, like here
Oh.
you and Josh, right? And you're, I guess, married at this point,
Yep. We're married. Yep.
and all of a sudden you're like, let's just start an
No.
animal refuge.
No, that
Is
wasn't it
that
at all.
is that how
No,
it
not
goes?
even. No,
Because
not even
that's not
close.
really a great
No.
idea.
I'll tell you, looking back, I'm like, boy, we were in way over our heads. We had no idea. So I'll tell you, Odd Man In was not, it wasn't like a preconceived idea. I like to say we may be the founders of Odd Man In, but it's actually Odd Man In who found us. So so
Hmm.
we started the whole project by adopting a dog named Roswell, who is still with us today. We lived in the city in Portland on a regular little city lot, like just a normal house in the suburbs. And we adopted a dog who had a bite history, and we thought we could handle it. And the short version of the story is we were in way over our heads with this dog. And so we bought a piece of property for Roswell, and we had considered, like, gosh, we went to the dog trainer and the behaviorist, and we got kicked out of puppy school. And I mean, you name it. We spent thousands of dollars trying to help this dog stop biting people. And we're not talking about a little dog. He's a 110-pound black lab. And when we
Wow.
got him from the no-kill shelter, he was already a year old. So he had a serious bite problem. So we took on Roswell. We couldn't manage him in the city. And so we bought a small 3.5-acre piece of property specifically for Roswell. And we started with, we had 2 dogs, a cat, and we came from the city with 7 backyard chickens. Like, that was the start of Odd Man Inn. And once we got to the property, we thought, okay, well, we have some space and we have like this old pole building that could be a barn. And now we have room for more chickens. Maybe we could find rescue chickens. Like, so naive. Like, people are always looking to give away their animals. So we literally like just went online and we were looking for animals who needed help. And so we took in a few more chickens. And I remember the first batch of chickens that we took in, they were like on death's door. I mean, they were like covered in mites and lice. And one of them had this terrible yeast infection on her back end. And another one had a huge wound on her back. Like, I was like, my gosh, these animals are in terrible shape. And so, you know, as a nurse, I was like, I think I can fix these things. And so I started researching and trying to figure out how to help these animals. And then we were like, oh, maybe we could take a couple of goats. And so we took in some rescue goats, free goats to good home. Anyway, we eventually ended up with 60 animals. And when we finally got to a point where I was like, oh, we were paying for everything just with my nursing job. I would work overtime shifts to pay for the vet. Like, we weren't a nonprofit. We weren't Odd Man Inn. We were just Josh and Wendy Smith taking in animals. And we got to the point where I said, you know, we probably need to come up with a different plan. And so I literally had to, remember, I was a baby vegan. So I literally had to Google farm sanctuary. Like, I didn't even know what farm sanctuary was, like the farm sanctuary. So I like started doing some research and I was like, babe, did you know about this? You can be a nonprofit and run an animal sanctuary. So I thought it would be like, oh, this will be great. Like, we'll get our nonprofit status and maybe people will donate towards helping rescued animals. And I mean, here we are 5 years later, and we have taken in close to 600 animals, and we have found safe homes for close to 400 animals. Wow. So that's the evolution of Odd Man Inn. I mean, we are a 501c3 nonprofit farm animal sanctuary and adoption shelter. And so we take animals in that are in desperate need. They're in conditions that they can't tolerate any longer. They're in bad situations. We help rehabilitate them back to health. And then we find them safe, respectable homes where they won't be exploited or bred or killed or eaten.
That's fantastic. That really is.
Thank you.
Really is great.
Thank you.
Now, what is your vision for the future of Odd Man Inn?
You know, I'll tell you, it has evolved over the last couple of years when we're still a young organization at only 5 years old. And Josh and I are both in our 40s. We're able-bodied people. We're still strong and healthy. Our goal is to have Odd Man Inn set up in a way that she can move on to the next generation when we are no longer to be her caregivers. And so, you know, one of the most difficult things, I think, for any animal sanctuary is knowing how and when to pass the torch. So that concept of a succession plan has to be on the forefront of your mind all the time. How are we going to set this up so that the animals have security if and when they outlive us? And so everything really that we are working on right now revolves around making sure Odd Man Inn is in a place of financial and physical security when we have to pass her on to the next generation, because she has far outgrown us. Like, she is larger than life, and we are honored to be her. We're honored to be her caregivers, but we also realize we can't do this work into our 60s and 70s. So we have to actively pursue getting her in a position of security so that when we pass the torch to the next generation, they are set up to hit the ground running.
That's great. That really is. I love the idea that it's just going to keep going and keep going and keep going.
That's the plan. Yep.
Till there is no need for it.
Exactly. You just that I was hoping that that's how you were going to finish that sentence. We hope that there is a day, one day, where there's no need for animal sanctuaries, right? Like, I mean, Josh tells this story much better than I do, but you know, when people were building the Egyptian pyramids, there were people that placed the first stone of the pyramids that never lived to see the end of that project. And we realize that we are probably those people placing some of the first bricks. But our hope is that at the end of the project, there will be no need for animal sanctuaries because there won't be animals who are exploited and abused and consumed. It just won't exist in our world anymore.
Yeah, I hope that is the case, and I hope it's sooner than later.
Me too.
Now, what is one habit that keeps you on track with your vegan plant-based diet? Obviously, doing a million things at once. I mean, like, is there any hack or any kind of trick that you do in order to make it easier for yourself?
Man, that's a really good question. I think for me, if there ever were a chance or there ever were an opportunity for me to feel tempted by something, like let's say, here's a perfect example. I'm working a 10-hour shift as a nurse and I haven't had lunch yet. And it's been 8 hours into my shift and I haven't had a break and I haven't eaten anything. And there is cheese dip sitting on the table in the break room. The easy thing to do would be, I'm just going to have a couple of bites of cheese dip because I'm so hungry. Except if I'm ever tempted by a situation like that, where I'm like physically hungry, all I have to think about is all I have to do is engage my conscience and think, where did that cheese dip come from? It came from cows. No, thank you. I'm out. That's all I have to do. And you know, just like talking about when I was a 6-year-old and seeing the chicken come out of the oven, it's the same concept. You're just engaging. For me, I'm just engaging my 6-year-old brain that understands that is an actual animal. Cheese dip is not cheese dip. It is from an actual animal, and an animal was hurt in order to produce that. And just engaging my conscience is enough for me to be completely turned off and say, I'll just eat some saltines. I'm good.
Now, is there a cookbook or a book that you've gifted to someone transitioning to a plant-based diet, say one of your volunteers or anything like that?
Oh my gosh. You know, one of my favorite cookbooks is the Mississippi Vegan. He has a great Instagram page and he takes gorgeous photos. And I told you I'm from New Orleans, so that is real, like that type of Southern comfort food. And the fact that he makes it all vegan. If I had my dream guy to cook for me would be Timothy from the Mississippi Vegan, and his cookbook.
No
is
offense,
amazing.
Josh.
No offense, Josh, but Josh is a terrible cook. He's just terrible. So the Mississippi
He's not
Vegan
Mississippi
is probably,
Vegan good.
No. But also, you know, I think sometimes people are a little overwhelmed by maybe ingredients that they don't understand or that they don't know where to purchase it, or they feel like it's too expensive or too much work. There's this other cookbook that it's called Thug Kitchen, and it's a little bit raunchy, but it's really funny. It's all vegan and it uses like really basic ingredients to make sort of classic, you know, like chili mac and, you know, hamburger helper and mac and cheese, except it's really basic ingredients. It's really minimal ingredients. It's very simple. And the cookbook is really funny. Like the text in the cookbook is really funny. So depending on if it's someone who's maybe a little bit more polished and sophisticated, then I go with the Mississippi Vegan. And if it's someone who is a little on the raunchier side, then I go with Thug Kitchen.
They might have changed the name of that to Bad Manners or something like that because of the thug,
because of the thug reference,
association
right?
of the word. Yeah.
They may have, but you know the cookbook I'm talking about.
Oh yeah. It's very funny. It's very it's very
colorful.
Very good. Yes, colorful is the. Okay, now finally, can you give me one word to describe how you felt before you became vegan and one word to describe how you feel now that you are vegan?
Ooh, that's so good. Where do you come up with these questions? That's so good. I think before I was vegan, if I had to choose one word, the word would be conflicted, where I knew that something was off in my choices. And I would, you struggle with, like I talked about, like, well, where should I buy my meat? And should I choose this milk or that milk? Or, what's going to cause the least harm to the planet? Which meat is going to be the most humanely slaughtered? Like, that creates so much conflict in your brain. So I think pre-vegan, I felt really conflicted when it came to dietary choices, not aligning with my conscience. And then post-vegan, I think I just feel peace. I feel peace about, we have to eat 3 to 5 times a day, right? I usually eat 5 times a day. So if I'm eating 5 times a day to fuel my body in order to do the work that I want to do, it's way more, I feel way more peace about the choices that I make and about food as fuel. And like you said, food does not control me. I control my food.
I love those 2 words. That's really, really good. Conflicted and peace.
Yeah, good.
It's such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for taking the time. And thank you so much for doing all you do for the animals. Everything that you do is fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I said to you before, I'm going to say it again, like, I feel it's so interesting. I feel like I just stepped into the matrix by talking to you on the phone like this. It's such an honor to be in your podcast, and really, like, you're such a kind, gentle interviewer. Thank you so much for showcasing those of us that are working in the world of animal rights.
Thank you. Can you give us the best way for people to find you on social media?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're really easy. We put Odd Man In on everything. So Instagram is probably the best way to keep track of what we're doing. It's just at Odd Man In on Instagram. Same thing with our Patreon page. It's just patreon.com/oddmanin. We have a Facebook account that you can follow there. And if you have any questions or you want to email us, then my email is just wendy@oddmanin.org.
That's great. Thank you so much for taking the time and being here on Plant Your Seed.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you. The pleasure is all mine.
Hope you are inspired by this story. And remember, it's never too late to plant your seed. Links to everything we talked about on the podcast can be found on Instagram at plant.yourseed in the show notes tab in the bio. If you enjoyed the show, remember to leave us a review. And until next time, thank you for listening.